The cattle came back before she even knew they were gone for good. Maria Norris stood at the split-rail fence of her ranch yard, her dark hair whipping in the dry Arizona wind, and she could not breathe. Not because of the dust that rolled in sheets across the flat land, not because of the punishing afternoon heat that made the scrub oak shimmer and bend. She could not breathe because 63 head of her best Hereford cattle were walking back through the southern gate of the Norris ranch, and behind them, driving them with a low, steady whistle and a turned hickory switch, was a man she had never seen before in her life. A man who had no business being on her land. A man who, by the look of him, the worn leather duster, the battered slouch hat pulled low against the sun, the revolver riding easy on his right hip, had never spent a single day of his life on the respectable side of the law. Maria stepped off the porch. Her boots hit the dry earth hard, and she reached back through the open door and took her late father's Winchester rifle from the rack beside the doorframe. She levered around into the chamber without breaking stride, because this was 1884, and a woman alone on 40 acres of Arizona territory did not walk toward a strange man on her property without iron in her hands. "Stop right there," she called out. Her voice was steady, which surprised even her, because her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her temples. The man stopped the horse. He was riding a gray roan, lean and road-worn, and the animal stood perfectly still as if it had been schooled in standing still under pressure, which Maria suspected it had been. The man raised one hand, palm out, the other hand keeping its easy hold on the reins. "I am not here to cause trouble," he said. His voice carried across the yard without him needing to raise it, deep and unhurried, like a man who had learned long ago that shouting accomplished nothing that calm did not accomplish better. "You are already causing trouble," Maria said. She kept the Winchester at her shoulder. "Those are my cattle. Where did you find them, and why are you bringing them back, and who in the name of God are you?" The man reached up and pulled the brim of his hat back so she could see his face. He was perhaps 30 years old, maybe a year or two past. His jaw was dark with several days of beard. His eyes, even across the distance of the yard, were a striking pale gray, almost silver, deeply set under a straight brow. He had the kind of face that had been weathered hard but started out well-made, and the combination of those two things created something that Maria did not want to notice but noticed anyway. "My name is Jasper Brenner," he said. She knew the name. Every person in Pima County who read the territorial newspaper or listened to a word of gossip at the feed store knew the name Jasper Brenner. He rode with no gang, owed allegiance to no town, and had twice escaped the Tucson jail by means that the newspapers described as audacious and the territorial marshals described as infuriating. He was wanted for robbery, for rustling, and for a half-dozen other things that the law had attributed to him over the past 5 years. He was, by every account that Maria had ever heard, a dangerous, lawless man with no fixed address and no moral compass, and he had just brought back 63 of her cattle. He swung down from the roan slowly, keeping his hands visible, and he walked toward the fence with the kind of deliberate calm that told her he understood exactly what the barrel of a Winchester felt like pointed at a man's chest, and he had made a calculated decision not to be afraid of it right now. He stopped at the fence rail. "I found them in Raleigh's Canyon," he said, "about 11 miles south. Del Stanton had them penned in a box wash. He was planning to drive them to the Nogales railhead by end of the week and sell them under a different brand. Del Stanton. The name landed in Maria's chest like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples went out in every direction. Del Stanton was her neighbor. His ranch bordered her eastern fence line for 2 miles. He had been to her father's funeral 6 months ago and had sat in the third pew and bowed his head and shaken her hand afterward with what she had believed was genuine sympathy. He had offered twice to buy out her grazing rights. She had refused twice. And then, apparently, he had decided to simply take what she would not sell him. Del Stanton, she repeated. The name felt like something poisonous in her mouth. He had his brand on a couple of the younger ones already, Jasper said. I got to them before he finished the job. His men, 3 of them, are not going to be a problem for you for a few days. They are resting comfortable in the canyon. I tied them. He paused. They are not hurt. I want to be clear about that. Maria lowered the Winchester by half an inch. Just half an inch. Why? She asked. Why did you do this? You are an outlaw. What possible reason does a man like you have for driving 63 stolen cattle back to a woman he has never met? Jasper Brenner looked at her for a long moment. The wind moved between them, carrying dust and the smell of cattle and the dry green scent of the desert. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer, and then he said the words that changed everything. Nobody should profit from taking what is yours. He said it simply, not as a speech, not as a performance. He said it the way a man states a fact that he has known for so long it has become as fundamental to him as the direction of true north. Maria stared at him. The Winchester slowly came down. She would think about that moment for a very long time afterward. The moment when the most wanted man in Pima County stood at her fence and gave her back 63 cattle, and said 8 words that contained more genuine justice than anything she had heard from the law in the 6 months since her father died and left her alone on this land. She would think about it every day until she understood what it meant, and then she would think about it even more. But first, she had to decide what to do with Jasper Brenner. The summer of 1884 had not been kind to Maria Norris. It had not been kind to most of the small ranchers in Arizona Territory, which was caught in the long and painful transition from open-range cattle country to fenced, documented, legally contested land, where men like Del Stanton, men with money and political connections and lawyers in Tucson, were steadily absorbing the smaller operations that surrounded them, one way or another. Maria had come to the ranch 8 months ago, in November of 1883, when a letter arrived at her teaching position in Santa Fe informing her that her father, Thomas Norris, had died of a heart attack on the 2nd day of October. She had packed 2 trunks, resigned her position at the school, and ridden south on the stage road because she had no other family and no other place to go, and because her father had built that ranch with 23 years of his life, and she was not prepared to let it dissolve into nothing. She had been 26 years old at the time. She was 26 years old still, though some days she felt considerably older. Her father had left her the land, the cattle, a small amount of cash money in a strongbox under the floorboards of the main bedroom, and a ranch hand named Clem Hatch, who was 61 years old, walked with a severe limp from an old injury, and could not in any realistic sense be considered protection against men like Del Stanton and his hired crew. Maria had spent the winter learning the business of running a cattle ranch from Clem, who was patient and thorough, and genuinely devoted to the Norris family. She had spent the spring building fences and tracking water sources and learning which of the neighboring ranchers were honest and which were not. She had developed a clear and accurate picture of the landscape she was operating in, and that picture included Del Stanton as a man to be carefully watched. What she had not anticipated was how quickly he would move, or how thoroughly. 3 weeks ago, she had ridden out to check the southern pasture and found it empty. She had spent 4 days searching every draw and wash within 8 miles of the ranch and found nothing. She had ridden into Tucson and spoken to the territorial marshal, a man named Grady Fawcett, who was polite and sympathetic and completely useless, and who had told her that cattle wandered, and that without evidence of theft there was very little he could do. She had ridden home alone, and she had sat at her kitchen table in the lamplit dark and thought about what it would mean to lose the cattle. It would mean losing the ranch. She could not hold the land without the income from the herd. She had enough money in the strongbox for perhaps 4 more months. After that, she would have nothing. And then Jasper Brenner had appeared out of the desert with her cattle behind him. She was not a woman who believed in miracles exactly, but she was a woman who believed in paying attention to things that happened, and she paid very close attention to Jasper Brenner. She put the Winchester back inside the door. She came back out to the porch and said, "Put the cattle in the north pasture. The gate is open. Clem," she called toward the barn, "come help bring these animals in." Old Clem appeared in the barn doorway, squinted at the stranger, squinted at the cattle, and then pulled his hat down and came out without a word, because Clem Hatch had learned decades ago that Maria Norris had good judgment, and her father before her had the same quality, and you trusted it. Jasper Brenner helped drive the cattle into the north pasture without being asked to do more than what was necessary. He did not try to make conversation. He did not try to make himself useful in any way that exceeded what the situation required. He simply did the work and then led his roan horse to the fence and waited. When the gate was latched and the cattle were milling and settling into the familiar pasture grass, Maria walked to where Jasper stood. Up close, she could see more clearly that he was genuinely tired. Not the ordinary tiredness of a long day, but the deeper exhaustion of a man who had been moving fast and sleeping little for some time. There was a tension in his jaw that she recognized as the tension of a man in a difficult position who was managing it by will alone. "How long have you been moving?" she asked. "About 30 hours, he said. "That is a long way to drive cattle in 30 hours. I did not want Stanton's men to catch up before I got here." She studied him. "Come inside," she said. "I will feed you." Jasper looked at her with an expression of genuine surprise which told her that whatever he had expected from this encounter, an invitation to dinner had not been among the possibilities he had considered. "You do not have to do that," he said. "I know I do not have to," Maria said. "I want information, and you look like you need a meal. Both things can be accomplished at the same table." The kitchen of the Norris Ranch house was a practical room with a cast-iron stove, a long pine table, 4 chairs, and a row of copper pots hanging from a beam. Maria set a fire in the stove and put beans on and sliced cornbread that she had made that morning, and set out a pot of coffee that she brewed strong. Jasper Brenner sat at the table with his hat in his hands and watched her work and did not say anything, which she appreciated. She had been surrounded by men over the past 8 months who could not seem to stop talking when they were in the presence of a woman alone, as if the silence itself were dangerous and had to be filled immediately. Jasper seemed perfectly comfortable in silence, which told her something about him. "Tell me everything about Del Stanton and the cattle," she said, sitting across from him with her own coffee cup. He told her. He was thorough and precise, and she could tell he had a good memory and a clear mind, because the account he gave was detailed in the ways that mattered: times, locations, numbers, the specific men he had seen, and economical in the ways that did not. He described finding the cattle in Raleigh's Canyon, described the 3 men guarding them, described the fresh brand marks that Stanton had had applied to the younger animals. "The fresh brands are evidence," Maria said. "If the marshal would look at them before they heal over." "They are evidence," Jasper agreed. "Whether the marshal does anything with them is a different question. Marshal Fawcett did not exactly distinguish himself when I reported the theft." "Fawcett drinks," Jasper said simply. "And Stanton contributes generously to the Democratic Party of Pima County, which means the people above Fawcett are disinclined to give him problems." Maria wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The weight of what he was describing settled over her like the heat of the afternoon, persistent and heavy. She had understood, in a general way, that the political landscape of the territory was corrupt. She had not fully understood how specifically and deliberately it was arranged to benefit men like Del Stanton at the expense of women like herself. "How do you know all of this?" she asked. Jasper was quiet for a moment. He looked at the coffee cup in front of him. "I grew up in this part of the country," he said. "I know how it works." "Where exactly?" "Cochise County," he said. "Before Tombstone got famous, before the Earps, before any of it. My family had a small ranch outside of Bisbee. We lost it." "How?" He looked up at her. The pale gray eyes were steady and unreadable. "The same way you were about to lose yours," he said. "A man with more money and more connections decided he wanted our water rights, and he found a way to take them, and the law found a way not to see it happening." The silence between them was different now, freighted with shared recognition. Maria felt something shift in her assessment of Jasper Brenner, not a softening exactly, because she was not a woman who softened toward strangers quickly, but a kind of recalibration. She had been measuring him against the template of what she had heard: the newspaper stories, the wanted posters, the reputation, and she was beginning to understand that the template was incomplete. "Your family," she said carefully. "What happened to them?" "My father died the winter after we lost the ranch," he said. "He was not a man built for defeat. My mother went to live with her sister in Albuquerque. I was 17. He paused. "I did not go to Albuquerque." "No," Maria said, "I can see that." Clem knocked at the kitchen door and put his head in. "Cattle are settled," he said. "I am going to keep watch tonight, Miss Norris, in case Stanton's boys come looking." "Take the rifle," she said. "And Clem, this is Jasper Brenner. He is the one who brought the cattle back." Clem looked at Jasper for a long moment with the specific evaluating gaze of an old man who has seen a great deal and trusted very little of what he has seen. Then he said, "I heard of you. You treated the Medina family fair when nobody else was doing it a few years back." Jasper nodded. "I remember the Medinas." "Good man," Clem said, and pulled his head back out of the doorway, which was as complete an endorsement as Clem Hatch was known to give. Maria refilled Jasper's coffee. "Tell me about the Medina family," she said, because she was finding, to her own considerable surprise, that she wanted to understand this man, and understanding required asking questions. "Juan Medina had a farm south of Tombstone," Jasper said. "A cattle broker was holding a debt over him that had been fraudulently arranged papers signed under duress, the interest compounded at a rate that was designed to be unpayable. The broker was about to foreclose." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I happen to have certain information about that broker that he very much preferred to keep private. I shared that information with him in a private way, and the debt was forgiven." "Blackmail," Maria said. "A negotiation," Jasper said, and the corner of his mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. "A very effective one. And this is how you operate. You intercede in injustices. For a man wanted for robbery and cattle rustling, that is a curious sideline." "The robbery charges are accurate," he said, without defensiveness and without apology. "I have taken money from men who took it from others. I do not pretend that is clean or lawful. The rustling charges are largely the invention of men like Stanton, who find it useful to have my name on a list of crimes whenever something goes wrong in their vicinity." Maria thought about this. The beans were simmering. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cornbread, and the dry Arizona evening that was coming through the small window above the wash basin. She thought about a man who had spent more than a decade outside the law, doing damage and doing justice in roughly equal measure, navigating a world that had shown him early that the official structures of law and order were tools owned by the powerful and pointed at everyone else. She thought about the fact that she was sitting at her kitchen table, comfortable and oddly unafraid, with the most wanted man in Pima County. "You can sleep in the barn tonight," she said. "You said yourself that Stanton's men are tied up in the canyon, so you have some time before the situation becomes urgent. You need to sleep. Tomorrow we can talk about what to do next." Jasper looked at her with that expression of surprised calculation again, as if he were continuously having to revise his expectations of her. "I do not want to bring trouble down on you," he said. "The trouble is already here," Maria said. "Del Stanton stole my cattle. You brought them back. The trouble did not arrive with you, Jasper Brenner. It was already waiting for me." He ate. She ate. The evening settled over the ranch, quiet and purple, the sky turning extraordinary colors in the way that only the Arizona desert sky can, all deep orange and rose, and a blue so dark at the edges it was almost black. After dinner, Jasper carried his bedroll to the barn without being asked to. Maria stood on the porch and watched him go and told herself that she was not watching him for any reason other than practical caution. She did not entirely believe herself, but she was willing to table the question for the moment. The next morning, Maria was up before sunrise, as she always was. She built the kitchen fire, put the coffee on, and went to feed the chickens, which was her morning habit, and one she found oddly centering the mechanical simplicity of scattering grain, while the sky turned from gray to pink to white, was a reliable way to organize her thoughts before the day began. She was scattering grain when she heard the barn door open. Jasper appeared, his hair damp from the water trough, his duster folded over his arm, looking marginally less exhausted than he had the night before. He had shaved, she noticed. He had apparently carried a razor in his saddlebag, which struck her as a particular combination of practicalities and vanities that said something about a man. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. He looked at the chickens and at her and at the sky. "You get up early." "The ranch does not wait for sleeping in," she said. "Come have coffee when you are ready. I want to talk about Del Stanton." Over coffee, they laid out the problem systematically, which was Maria's preferred method of approaching everything. The problem had several parts. First, the cattle were back, but Stanton knew where they were and would not simply abandon his claim. Second, the fresh brands on the younger cattle were evidence of the theft, but the territorial marshal was unlikely to act. Third, Stanton's 3 men would free themselves within a day, possibly less, and would report back to their employer, at which point Stanton would know precisely what had happened and would adjust his strategy accordingly. "He will try again," Maria said. "Perhaps not the same approach. But he wants this land and he will try again." "He will," Jasper agreed. "So the question is how to make the cost of trying again too high for him to bear." Jasper looked at her across the table. "You think very clearly," he said. "I was a school teacher," she said. "Clear thinking is a professional hazard." Something happened in his face when she said that. Not a dramatic change, but a subtle one, a kind of recognition, or perhaps pleasure. As if the information fit into a category, he had been building and completed a picture he was trying to form. "What do you teach?" he asked, and she noticed that he used the present tense as if her teaching career were still in progress, which was either an oversight or a kindness. "Everything," she said. "It was a one-room school. Reading, arithmetic, history, geography, a little Latin with the older students." She paused. "I miss it. I will be honest about that. I miss the children. But you came here anyway." "My father built this ranch," she said. "He is in this ground. I am not going to let Del Stanton have it." The decision was in her voice, like iron wire, thin, bright, and absolutely unbreakable. Jasper heard it. She could tell by the way he straightened slightly, the way his attention sharpened. "Here is what I think," he said. "The fresh brands are the key. We need someone with legitimate authority to see them before they heal and before Stanton can make the animals disappear. Marshal Fawcett is a dead end. But there is a federal territorial judge in Tucson, a man named Hargrove, who is not in Stanton's pocket. He has ruled against large operators before. If we can get a complaint in front of him with physical evidence." "How do you know about Judge Hargrove?" Maria asked. Jasper was quiet for just a moment. "I appeared before him once," he said. "The charges did not stick, but I got a clear look at the man. He is honest." Maria thought about this. An honest judge and stolen cattle with fresh brands. It was not nothing. "I would need a lawyer," she said. "I cannot present a legal complaint myself." "There is a man named Arturo Vega in Tucson," Jasper said. "He practices law out of an office on Congress Street. He represents a lot of the smaller operators, the Mexican land grant families, homesteaders. He is good. He will take your case." "How do you know Arturo Vega?" Jasper almost smiled again. "He helped me once," he said, "when I was younger and more careless. He is an honest man. He will help you." "You seem to know a great many honest people for a man who operates outside the law," Maria said. "I seek them out," Jasper said. "They are rarer than they should be and worth knowing when you find them." There was a pause. The morning light was strengthening, coming through the kitchen window in long golden bars. The coffee was warm in Maria's hands. Outside, she could hear Clem moving around the yard and the distant lowing of the cattle in the north pasture, her cattle, home and alive and branded with her rightful mark. "Why did you really bring them back?" she asked. It was not the same question she had asked yesterday. Yesterday she had been asking for information. Today she was asking for truth. Jasper looked at her steadily. "I was passing through Raleigh's Canyon 3 nights ago," he said. "I saw the camp and the cattle. I recognized the Norris brand from the description your ranch hand had been putting out. Clem had been in Bisbee asking after your cattle. Did you know that? Old man must have ridden 200 miles looking." Maria felt her throat tight. She had not known that. She would have to have a very specific conversation with Clem Hatch about telling her things. "I recognized the brand," Jasper continued, "and I knew what Stanton was doing. I have seen it done before. I was not willing to ride past it." He paused. "That is all." "Is it all?" The question hung between them. She was not entirely sure why she had asked it. It was a question with a sharp edge to it, and she had not exactly planned to ask it, but there it was. Jasper looked at his coffee cup. "I have been riding through this part of the territory for about 2 weeks," he said. "I heard about Thomas Norris dying and leaving his ranch to his daughter. I heard that the daughter came down from Santa Fe and was trying to hold the ranch alone." He looked up. "I had a reason to be in the area. I made sure I was in the area. When I found your cattle in Stanton's camp, it was not entirely by accident." Maria absorbed this. "You were looking out for a woman you had never met," she said. "I was looking out for a situation I recognized," he said carefully. "The specifics happened to involve you." She could tell that he was choosing his words with great care, and that the care was a kind of honesty. He was not pretending to a more neutral motivation than he actually had, but he was also not claiming more than was true. He had been in the area on purpose. He had been paying attention to her situation on purpose. Whether that constituted concern for a stranger or something more personal in its nature, she suspected he was not yet willing to say, and she was not yet willing to press him on it. "Thank you," she said, "for whatever the actual reason was." "You are welcome," he said, "for whatever the actual reason was." The corner of his mouth moved again. This time it became a full, brief smile, and Maria looked away from it with a deliberateness that she immediately recognized as significant. They rode to Tucson that same day, Maria and Jasper and old Clem with 3 of the rebranded young cattle in tow as evidence. It was a hard ride, 4 hours in the full Arizona sun, the road south between the saguaro cactus and the Rocky Hills, and the occasional small ranch with its windmill turning slow. Maria rode her bay mare, which was good-tempered and smooth-gaited, and Jasper rode the gray roan, and Clem rode the mule he had been riding for 11 years and would not be parted from. Maria was not unaware of the strange picture they made. A respectable ranching widow, well, a ranching daughter, which was perhaps even more socially ambiguous, riding with the most wanted man in Pima County, and a 61-year-old limping ranch hand, leading stolen cattle through the desert sun. She was fairly certain this was not what her father had imagined for her when she took over the ranch. Then again, her father had been a man who dealt with things as they were rather than as he wished them to be, and she was trying to honor that quality in him. Jasper rode slightly ahead and slightly to the right, which positioned him between her and the open desert to the west, and she noticed this without remarking on it. He scanned the terrain as they rode in a way that was not theatrical or obvious but was constant and thorough, the automatic vigilance of a man who had spent years in open country where threats could come from anywhere and advance notice was survival. "Tell me something about yourself," she said, when they had been riding for about 2 hours. "Something that is not in the newspapers." He thought about it. "I read," he said, "a great deal. I carry books." She looked at him with genuine surprise. "What kind of books?" "Whatever I can get. History mostly. I like history." He paused. "I have read Darwin twice. I have read most of Dickens. I have a very battered copy of Plutarch's Lives that I have been carrying for 3 years. "Plutarch," Maria said. "In the original Greek." He looked at her sidelong. "In translation," he said. "I am not a miracle." "Most men in this territory cannot spell Plutarch," she said. "Most men in this territory do not have a great deal of time to read," he said. I, on the other hand, spend a great deal of time camped in isolated places waiting for things to happen. Reading passes the hours." She smiled. She had not intended to smile, but it happened anyway. "What history?" "The Roman Republic," he said. "The way a society can start with genuine principles and gradually be hollowed out by men who use the forms of law to serve private interests. It is instructive." He paused. "Perhaps you can see why it speaks to me." "I can," she said, and she meant it on multiple levels simultaneously. Tucson in 1884 was a city in vigorous and somewhat chaotic transition. The Southern Pacific Railroad had come through 3 years earlier and was in the process of transforming what had been a sleepy adobe town into something approaching a real city, with brick buildings and a proper hotel and stores that carried goods from St. Louis and New York. It was loud and dusty and smelled of horses and machinery and ambition, and Maria had come to feel a complicated mixture of admiration and unease about it, the way she felt about most things that were growing faster than they could be fully understood. Arturo Vega's office was on Congress Street in a narrow brick building between a hardware store and a barber shop. He was a compact, precise man of about 45, with silver in his dark hair and the slightly formal bearing of a man who had fought for every credential he possessed and was not inclined to let anyone forget it. He greeted Maria with professional warmth and greeted Jasper with the particular careful warmth of a man who owed another man a significant debt and had not yet determined the nature of the current request. "Sit down," he said, and they sat, and Maria told him everything. She was thorough and organized, the way she had been with Jasper at the kitchen table, laying out the facts in clean sequence. The missing cattle, the territorial marshal's failure to act, Jasper's discovery and recovery of the herd, the rebranded young animals tied outside. When she finished, Arturo Vega was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The rebranded cattle are the key. I can file an emergency complaint with Judge Hargrove today and request an immediate examination of the animals by a qualified cattle inspector before the brands heal further. If Hargrove grants it, and I believe he will, we have physical evidence of fraud and criminal theft." He looked at Maria. "Del Stanton has done this before, Miss Norris. He is smarter than most, and he has stayed just barely on the safe side of the law in previous instances. But this time he moved too quickly and left evidence. This time we have him." "What about the men I tied in the canyon?" Jasper said. Arturo looked at him. "Where are they now?" "They freed themselves by yesterday afternoon, I would estimate," Jasper said. "They are back at Stanton's operation by now." "Then Stanton already knows his plan failed," Arturo said, "which means he is already constructing a response. We need to move faster than he can." He stood up. "I am going to Judge Hargrove's chamber this afternoon. I need you both available to sign affidavits." They waited in the outer office while Arturo went to the courthouse. Jasper sat in one of the wooden chairs and leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes, and within 90 seconds he was asleep, with the total and immediate unconsciousness of a man who had learned to sleep anywhere and in any circumstance, because in his life the opportunity to sleep was unpredictable and had to be seized when it appeared. Maria watched him sleep for a moment. There was something disarming about it. The defensiveness went out of his face when he was unconscious, the vigilance that was otherwise constant, and what remained was a face that was simply a man's face, younger-looking, oddly peaceful. She looked away before she could follow that line of thought any further. She thought instead about Del Stanton, about what had driven him to move against her specifically and in this particular way. The cattle theft was a calculated act, not a spontaneous one. He had planned it. He had waited for the right moment, which she realized would have been the moment when he felt that she was sufficiently isolated and sufficiently without allies that there would be no meaningful response. The territorial marshal's indifference had been part of that calculation. Her status as a single woman without family backing had been part of it. He had underestimated her. Men usually did, and she had long since stopped being offended by it and had begun, instead, to treat it as a tactical advantage. Archero returned in 2 hours with a signed order from Judge Hargrove. The young cattle were to be examined by a certified livestock inspector within 24 hours. If the inspection confirmed fraudulent rebranding, a warrant for Del Stanton's arrest would be issued. Maria signed her affidavit. Jasper signed his. Archero looked at Jasper's signature for a moment and then at Jasper. "You understand," he said carefully, "that by signing this document, you are placing yourself in the legal record as a witness. That creates certain risks for a man in your particular situation." "I know," Jasper said. "You do not have to." "I know," Jasper said again with quiet finality. Archero nodded and folded the papers. "The inspector can be at your ranch by tomorrow morning," he told Maria. "I will send a rider tonight. Keep the animals separated and do not let anyone near them." They rode back through the late afternoon, the sun behind them now and the desert casting long shadows east. Clem had gone ahead with the cattle and was already most of the way home. Maria and Jasper rode at a pace that was comfortable rather than urgent, because the urgent part of the day was done, and what remained was the journey itself. The sky ahead of them was doing its evening thing, turning deep violet and gold, and the saguaro cactus threw their strange arms up against it in silhouette. It was the kind of Arizona evening that people who had grown up somewhere else remembered for the rest of their lives. "You signed that affidavit knowing that Marshal Fawcett could use it to locate you," Maria said. "Yes," Jasper said. "That was foolish." "Possibly," he said. "Why did you do it?" He was quiet for a while. The horses walked steadily, their hooves soft on the dry road. Then he said, "Because it was the right document to sign. Because your case needs that testimony. Because doing the right thing and managing the consequences later is preferable to doing the safe thing and living with it." Maria thought about the careful, deliberate way he said this, and she thought about what it said about the particular moral architecture of Jasper Brenner's life. A life spent outside the law, yes, but organized around a set of principles that were, in some ways, more demanding than the law's principles, because the law could be corrupted and bought and arranged to benefit the powerful, while Jasper's principles seemed to operate independently of all of that. Answering only to something internal that had been formed, she suspected. In the winter his family lost their ranch, and his father did not survive the defeat. "Tell me about your father," she said, because she was thinking about hers. He was surprised by the question. She could see it. "Why?" "Because I lost mine 6 months ago and I am still trying to understand what that means," she said. "And because you lost yours when you were 17, which is a terrible time to lose a father, and I think it shaped a great deal of what you became." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he would decline to answer. Then he said, "He was a quiet man, not cold but contained. He showed you what he felt through what he did rather than what he said. He built things. Every fence on our ranch, every outbuilding he built with his own hands. When we lost the ranch, he did not rebuild. He could not." He paused. "He died the following January. Officially it was pneumonia. Really it was grief. And you resolved never to be defeated the way he was," Maria said. Jasper looked at her. "You are perceptive." "I am a teacher," she said. "Understanding why people are the way they are is the foundation of the work." They rode in silence for a while, but it was a different silence now. Not the careful silence of strangers managing unfamiliarity, but something more comfortable. The silence of people who had said enough true things to each other that the quiet felt natural rather than awkward. "Your father," Jasper said after a while. "Tell me about him." And Maria talked. She talked about Thomas Norris, who had come out from Ohio in 1861 with $60 and a surveying compass, and had built his ranch in the Arizona desert through sheer stubbornness and careful work, who had read to her every night when she was a child, history and adventure and poetry, who had taught her to ride and to shoot, and to read the sky for weather, and to calculate water needs for a given number of head over a given acreage, who had believed without reservation that his daughter was as capable as any man of managing anything that needed to be managed, which had been, in the Arizona territory of the 1880s, an unusual and precious conviction to hold. "He sounds like a remarkable man," Jasper said when she finished. "He was," Maria said. "I'm trying to be worthy of what he built." "You are," Jasper said simply. It was the most direct and uncomplicated compliment she had received since her father died, and it landed differently than compliments usually did, not as a social nicety, but as an honest assessment from a man who was clearly not in the habit of social niceties, which gave it a weight that was almost physical. They reached the ranch as the last light was fading from the sky. Clem had the cattle penned and was sitting on the porch with his rifle across his knees, looking like a man who had decided something and was peacefully committed to it. "Stanton sent a man," Clem said, "about an hour ago, rode up to the south fence and just sat there for a while looking at the north pasture. Then he rode off." "Taking stock," Jasper said. "He knows the cattle are back. He is deciding what to do next." "Then we should be ready for whatever he decides," Maria said. She went inside and began to prepare supper with the calm efficiency she had learned was the best response to anxiety. Give your hands something useful to do, and let your mind work quietly underneath. Jasper unsaddled the roan and tended to it carefully, brushing it down and checking its feet, and Maria watched through the kitchen window and thought that a man who cared for his horse that well after a long and hard day had a reliable character in other respects. Supper was quiet. Afterward, Clem went to keep watch. Jasper helped Maria clear the table, which she had not asked him to do and which surprised her. "You do not have to do that," she said. "I know," he said, and dried a plate. "You have been on the road a very long time," she said. "You could stop somewhere." "Where?" he asked. It was a simple question with a complicated weight. She thought about what it meant to be a man like Jasper Brenner, nowhere to go, no place that was his, no fixed point on the map that corresponded to home. Just the gray roan and the bedroll and the battered copy of Plutarch and the wide open country that was both his freedom and his prison. "I do not know," she said honestly, "but somewhere eventually." "Eventually," he agreed. She went to bed and lay awake for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the desert and thinking about hidden motives and forced choices, and the strange directions that life could move when you stopped expecting it to go the way you had planned. The livestock inspector arrived the next morning, a meticulous man named Elijah Crawford who carried his tools in a leather case and examined the rebranded young cattle with the focused intensity of a surgeon. He spent the better part of 2 hours with the animals, measuring and photographing with the small camera he carried and making detailed notes in a leather ledger. At the end of it, he said, in the formal language of a man who understood that his words would be entered into legal proceedings, "The brands on these 3 animals have been applied within the past 10 days over partially obliterated previous marks consistent with the Norris Ranch brand. In my professional opinion, this constitutes deliberate and fraudulent rebranding for the purpose of concealing stolen cattle." He gave Maria a copy of his report and took the original to Arturo Vega in Tucson. By noon that same day, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Del Stanton on charges of cattle theft and fraud. By the following morning, Del Stanton had ridden out of Pima County on his best horse and was not found for 3 weeks, and when he was found, he was in Sonora, Mexico, which was outside the jurisdiction of anyone in Arizona territory. Maria stood on her porch and held Arturo Vega's letter telling her this news, and she felt a complicated mixture of relief and frustration that she suspected was entirely appropriate to the situation. Jasper was in the yard, working on a section of fence that had needed repair for some weeks. He had started on it that morning without being asked, with the fence wire and the post maul from the barn, and the sight of him at the work, the methodical competence of a man who knew how to do physical things and did not consider it beneath him, had caused Maria a feeling that she was running out of patience for categorizing as anything other than what it was. She walked out to where he was working and told him about Stanton. He listened, set down the post maul, and thought for a moment. Sonora is not the end of it, he said. He can operate from there, work through intermediaries, but he cannot come back into the territory without risking arrest, which limits him significantly. He looked at her. You are safe, Maria, not perfectly safe forever, but safe enough to build on. It was the first time he had used her given name. He said it the same way he said everything, without drama or self-consciousness, as if it were simply the accurate thing to say. She thought the name sounded different when he said it. She thought this was something she needed to stop thinking. I want you to stay, she said, on the ranch as a ranch hand. He was very still for a moment. That is not a small thing to offer, he said. I know what it is, she said. I need an extra hand. Clem is getting older and this place is too much for two people to manage properly. I'm offering you work and a fair wage and a place to stay. She paused. I'm not offering charity, I am offering employment. I am a wanted man, he said. Del Stanton is also a wanted man, she said, and he was practically a civic leader until yesterday. Marshall Fawcett has never been within 100 miles of this ranch. You would be working honest land work on a legitimate ranch, which is rather different from the activities that got you onto a wanted poster. He looked at her steadily. You have thought about this carefully, he said. I thought about it last night when I could not sleep, she said, which was most of the night. The gray eyes held something that she could not entirely name, something careful and alive and slightly afraid, which surprised her, because she had not thought of Jasper Brenner as a man who was afraid of very much. All right, he said. I will stay. The weeks that followed were, in their own way, a kind of education for both of them. Jasper learned the specific rhythms and requirements of the Norris ranch, the water schedule, the fence lines, the particular temperaments of the horses and cattle, the seasonal patterns of the grazing land. He was a fast learner and a thorough worker, and he had the specific gift of being able to figure out what needed doing before he was told to do it, which was, in Maria's opinion, the rarest and most valuable quality in any person doing any kind of work. Maria learned things too, though the things she learned were less operational. She learned that Jasper woke at first light every day without fail. She learned that he read for an hour after supper, sitting at the table with the oil lamp, and whatever book he had current, completely absorbed. She learned that he could be funny, in a dry and understated way that crept up on you and made you laugh before you had quite registered that a joke had been made. She learned that he was patient with the horses and firm with the cattle, and unexpectedly gentle with the small details of ranch life. The way he set a wounded bird's wing one afternoon, with the same care and precision he would have given to any more significant task. She learned that she looked for him in the yard when she came out in the morning, and felt a specific kind of satisfaction when she found him there, and this was a thing that she could no longer categorize as anything neutral. One evening in late September, about 5 weeks after Jasper had come to the ranch, she was working on the ranch's accounts at the kitchen table when a thunderstorm came up fast from the south, the way Arizona summer thunderstorms did, sudden, total, and magnificent. The rain hit the roof like a physical thing, and the lightning lit the desert in strobes of white. Jasper came in from the barn, wet to the skin, his hair dark with rain, and stopped inside the kitchen door with water running off the brim of his hat. He looked at the scene, the lamp, the account books, Maria at the table with a pencil behind her ear, and for a moment he simply stood there, and the expression on his face was something that Maria could not look at for very long without feeling it in her chest. "Sit down," she said. "I will get a towel." She got the towel. He sat. She went back to the accounts and he went to the shelf for Plutarch, and they sat at opposite ends of the table while the storm worked itself out overhead, and the lamp threw its warm light over both of them, and the night outside was dark and alive with rain and lightning. After a while, Jasper said, without looking up from his book, "This is nice." Maria looked up. "What is?" "This," he said. "Just this." She looked at him, and he looked at her, and something was said between them in that look that neither of them put into words, because the words were not quite ready yet, But the thing itself was there, unmistakable and undeniable, present in the room with them like a fourth person. "Yes," Marya said, "it is." She went back to the accounts. He went back to Plutarch. But the quality of the silence was different now, warmer, more specific, and she sat with it and let herself feel it without trying to reduce it to something more manageable. October came and the nights turned cold and the leaves on the cottonwoods along the creek bottom went gold and shook in the wind. The ranch work shifted with the season, cattle management, winter preparations, the laying in of supplies. Jasper took on more and more of the work without being directed, and Marya found herself in the unfamiliar position of having a genuine partner in the management of the place, someone whose judgment she trusted, and whose presence she had come to rely on in ways that went considerably beyond the operational. Clem Hatch, who was not a man who missed very much, watched this development with the satisfied expression of someone who had made a private prediction and was watching it come true. "He is a good man," Clem told her one afternoon, with the specificity of a man who has made this assessment carefully and is prepared to defend it. "He has a complicated history," Marya said. "So do most good men," Clem said, and went back to mending harness. The conversation that had been building between Marya and Jasper since the night of the thunderstorm arrived on a Saturday evening in mid-October. They had been into town together for supplies, a practical, ordinary errand that had somehow acquired the quality of something more, in the way that ordinary errands can when you are doing them with a person whose company you have come to value beyond all practical explanation. They had eaten dinner at the town's small restaurant, a thing that had started as a simple matter of convenience. It was late and they were hungry and had become, over the course of it, something that looked very much like a date, although neither of them had used that word or admitted to the possibility in any explicit way. On the ride back, with the October stars very bright and very close and the night air sharp and clean, Jasper said, "I need to tell you something." "All right," Marya said. He was quiet for a moment and she let him have the quiet, because she understood by now that he was a man who chose his words rather than spraying them out in any direction and hoping for the best. "I came to this part of the territory on purpose," he said. "I told you that, but I did not tell you all of it." He looked straight ahead at the dark road between the saguaros. "I had heard about Thomas Norris dying, and I had heard about his daughter coming down from Santa Fe. And I was curious about someone who would do that, who would leave a settled life and come out to a hard place because her father built something there and she would not let it go." He paused. "I was curious about the kind of person who makes that choice." "And now," Marya asked, her voice was steady, she was proud of it. "Now I have spent 5 weeks on that ranch," he said, "and I know the kind of person who makes that choice, and I find that I do not want to leave." "Then do not leave," she said. He turned and looked at her. The moonlight was full on his face. "Marya," he said, "a man like me, I have a long record and a complicated past, and I am not Jasper," she said. "I taught school in New Mexico for 4 years. I have read more books than most people in this territory. I am 26 years old and I have been managing a cattle ranch alone for most of a year. I am quite capable of assessing a man's character for myself and arriving at my own conclusions about him." "And your conclusion?" he asked. "My conclusion," she said, "is that you are the best man I have met in a very long time, and your past is part of what made you that way, and I am not afraid of it." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he reached across the space between the horses and took her hand, carefully and completely, and held it. Just that. Just her hand in his, warm and steady, under the October stars on the road back to the ranch. "I have never wanted anything the way I want to stay here," he said. "I want you to know that." "I know," she said. "I wanted you to know the same thing." They rode the rest of the way home like that, with their hands linked between the horses, and the desert was quiet and full of stars and the dry cold smell of October, and Marya thought that this was one of the moments she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The specific weight of his hand, and the specific quality of the dark, and the specific feeling of something that had been fearful and uncertain resolving into something certain and good. Arturo Vega sent a letter in November. Del Stanton, operating from Sonora, had attempted to arrange the sale of a portion of the Norris ranch's eastern water rights through an intermediary in Tucson, apparently on the theory that if he could not steal the cattle, he could create a fraudulent legal claim to the water, which in the Arizona desert was worth considerably more than the cattle anyway. The attempt had been caught early because Archero had filed protective documentation on Maria's behalf covering all of the ranch's water rights, and the fraudulent claim had collapsed immediately. Stanton tried 2 more things over the following year. Both were stopped. The third time, he attempted something so blatant that even the territorial government could not ignore it, and he was arrested in Sonora on a cooperation agreement with Mexican authorities and extradited back to Arizona territory, where he was tried and convicted and sentenced to 7 years in Yuma Territorial Prison. Judge Hargrove presided. Maria attended the trial and sat in the second row and listened to every word, and she felt something she had not expected to feel when the verdict was read, which was not triumph but a quieter thing, a sense of rightness, of the world tilting back toward its proper orientation after having been disturbed. Jasper sat beside her at the trial. He was not a man who could officially be present in a courtroom given his legal situation, but he was present informally, in the gallery, wearing a suit that he had bought in Tucson specifically for the occasion, which had made Maria look at him in a new way that she had spent the morning trying to compose herself about. He held her hand again during the verdict, the same way he had held it on the road in October, certain and warm. They rode home from the trial in the late afternoon, and the evening was coming on gold and long over the desert, and when they reached the ranch gate Jasper stopped his horse and said, "Maria, there is something I need to ask you." She stopped her mare and looked at him. He had his hat in his hands, which was new. Jasper Brenner was not a man who was visibly nervous, and the fact that he was nervous now told her something important. "Ask it," she said gently. "I know that I am not by any conventional measure a suitable person to ask this," he said. "I know that. My record, my history, the things I have done, and the things I am still technically wanted for, none of that is small or easily managed." He looked at her steadily. "But I love you. I have loved you since approximately the 3rd morning I woke up on this ranch and heard you talking to the chickens through the barn door, which I realize is a specific and slightly ridiculous thing to admit." Maria felt laughter move through her, helpless and warm, and she let it come. "You can hear me from the barn," she said. "The walls are not thick," he said, "and you talk to them. You tell them things, about your day and what needs to be done, and occasionally about books you have read." He was almost smiling. "It is the most endearing thing I have ever seen in my life." "Oh God," Maria said, laughing, "I talk to the chickens." "You do," he said, and the almost smile became fully a smile, and then something more serious came into his face. "Maria, I want to be here. I want to be here with you properly, permanently. I want to help you build what your father started, and I want a life here with you." He paused. "If you will have me, which is the question I am asking." Maria looked at him. She thought about 8 words spoken at a fence on a summer afternoon, 8 words that had started everything. Nobody should profit from taking what is yours. She thought about the man who had said those words and then stayed to make sure they were true, and then stayed further because he could not make himself leave, and then stayed further still because she could not imagine asking him to. "Yes," she said, "I will have you. Obviously, I have been waiting for you to ask for several months." He looked at her with that expression of genuine surprise that she had come to love on his face. "Several months," he said. "Jasper," she said, "I held your hand in the moonlight in October. The message was fairly clear." He laughed, an open, real laugh that she had heard before, but never quite like this, freed from the last of whatever guard he kept, completely unguarded and entirely joyful. And the sound of it in the quiet desert evening was one of the best things she had ever heard. He rode his horse to hers and leaned across the distance between them and kissed her, careful and certain and entirely without hesitation. And she kissed him back with everything she had been holding since that October evening, since the thunderstorm, since the day he had appeared at her fence with 63 cattle and 8 words that had changed everything. They were married in Tucson on the first Saturday of February, 1885. The ceremony was performed by a Congregationalist minister at the small church on Church Street, which was a modest building of adobe and whitewash with a wooden cross above the door. Arturo Vega stood as witness. Clem Hatch wore his best and only suit, which was slightly too large for him but which he had pressed very carefully, and he sat in the front pew and cried without any apparent embarrassment about it, which was characteristic of Clem. The matter of Jasper's legal situation required some navigation. Arturo Vega had spent several months working on this problem. The robbery charges that were legitimately attributable to Jasper were narrower than the general wanted poster suggested. Arturo negotiated a formal arrangement with the territorial prosecutor. Not a full pardon, which was politically impossible, but a settlement whereby Jasper would pay restitution on the legitimate charges, which his savings covered, and the remaining, largely fictitious rustling charges would be quietly set aside in exchange for a formal declaration of civil behavior going forward. It was not perfect justice, and Arturo said so clearly, and Jasper accepted it with the same practicality with which he accepted everything else, as the best available outcome in an imperfect world, and sufficient to build on. Marshall Fawcett, for what it was worth, had been removed from his position the previous autumn following an investigation into his conduct that was in some way connected to the Stanton affair. His replacement was a younger man named Gallagher who had a reputation for actual enforcement of actual law, which was a modest improvement in the landscape. The ranch in the winter of 1885 had a quality that it had not had when Maria arrived the previous November. A settled, inhabited quality, the sense of a place that was fully occupied by people who intended to be there. Jasper had built a second room onto the house over the fall, working steadily through the cooler, whether with lumber he had cut from the creek bottom timber, and the room was solid and well-made and smelled of fresh pine. And Maria had put curtains in the window that she had sewn herself from blue cotton she had bought in Tucson. And the combination of his work and her work was something she found she could not look at without feeling something very large and very warm in her chest. They hired 2 more hands in the spring, a young man named Pedro Vasquez from a family Maria knew in the valley, and an older man, a former cavalry soldier named Franklin, who was quietly competent and asked few questions. With 4 people working the ranch properly, the operation expanded. They increased the herd by 20 head. They repaired and extended the fencing. They put in a vegetable garden south of the house that Maria managed with the same systematic thoroughness she brought to everything. Letters went back and forth between Maria and her friend Clara Simmons in Santa Fe, and in one of those letters Clara wrote, in her characteristic dry way, "You have married an outlaw, Maria, and from the way you write about him I deduce that this is the best thing that has ever happened to you, which says something interesting about outlaws and possibly something interesting about you." Maria read that letter aloud to Jasper over supper and he laughed and said, "I like Clara." "You would," Maria said. "You are both people who say exactly what they mean." "Is that a quality?" he asked. "It is the best quality," she said. The first hard test of the new life came in the summer of 1885, not from an external threat but from within, when Jasper received a letter from a man named Cole Briggs, who had ridden with him several years earlier, and who was now in the Yuma Territorial Prison, requesting money for his defense in a further legal proceeding. The letter was not exactly a threat, but it contained the clear implication that Cole Briggs knew things about Jasper's past activities that could complicate the settlement arrangement Arturo had negotiated. Jasper showed Maria the letter without hesitation. He sat it on the kitchen table and said, "You need to see this." She read it. She looked up at him. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to send him nothing," Jasper said, Because sending him money is an admission of vulnerability, and once you admit that to a man like Cole, the requests do not stop. He was watching her face. But I want to know what you think. The fact that he asked her directly, genuinely, with no implication that he had already decided and was consulting her as a courtesy, was, in its own way, a complete statement about the nature of their partnership, which was the real kind, the kind built on mutual respect and genuine consultation. "Do not send him money," Maria said. "Send the letter to Archero. Archero can advise us on whether Cole has any actual legal leverage, or whether this is simply a bluff. If there is leverage, we address it legally. If it is a bluff, we call it." Archero's assessment was that it was largely a bluff. Cole Briggs's knowledge of specific activities that fell outside the settled arrangement was limited, and he was facing an additional 7 years in prison regardless of what Jasper did or did not do. Archero drafted a careful legal letter in response that made clear that any claims made by Cole Briggs would be vigorously contested, and that the territorial prosecutor was already aware of the settlement arrangement and supportive of it. Cole Briggs did not write again, but the incident had done something that Maria had not entirely anticipated, which was to surface, briefly and uncomfortably, the full reality of what Jasper's past contained. Not the philosophy of it, she had understood the philosophy from the beginning, but the specific texture of it. The specific men and the specific acts and the specific moral cost of having lived outside the law for 13 years in a territory where the law was imperfect but not meaningless. She thought about it for a few days, and then she brought it to the kitchen table as she brought most serious things, directly and without preamble. "The Cole Briggs letter," she said. "It is not the thing itself that I want to talk about. I want to talk about what it represents." Jasper nodded. He had been waiting, she could tell, with the patience of a man who has learned to wait for the other person to find their words. "You lived a life that caused harm," she said. "Not only harm, you also did things that were genuinely just, and I hold that as real, but you caused harm too, and I need to understand how you carry that." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, carefully, and with honesty, "I do not pretend that because the men I took from were themselves dishonest, it makes what I did clean. It does not. I made choices that I would not make now because I had not found a reason to be inside the law yet. I had not found anything worth being inside it for." He paused. "I have found it now, you understand that." "I understand it," she said. "I wanted to hear you say it." "Then hear this," he said. "The rest of my life is the answer to the question of who I am. The past is true and I own it. But this ranch, this work, this is what I am building toward. This is what I intend to be." Maria reached across the table and took his hand. "That is enough," she said. "More than enough." The summer moved through its long, hot days and into the particular mercy of an Arizona fall. The ranch thrived. The herd was healthy. Pedro and Franklin were reliable and easy to work with, and the operation developed a daily rhythm that felt more and more like the thing it was, a going concern, a real ranch, a place where people were building something durable. In October of 1885, on the first anniversary of Jasper's arrival at the Norris ranch, Maria told him over breakfast that she was expecting their first child. He set down his coffee cup very carefully. He was absolutely still for a moment. Then he looked at her with an expression that she had never seen on his face before, something completely open, all the composed self-containment gone, just a man looking at the most astonishing news he had ever received in his life. "When?" he said. "April," she said. "Probably late April." He came around the table and took her face in his hands and kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her mouth, and then he held her with the careful and complete attentiveness of a man who has just understood that the most important thing in his life has gotten larger, and he does not intend to take any of it for granted. "A baby," he said, against her hair. "A baby," she confirmed. How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tired," she said, "and very happy." "Both of those make sense," he said, and held her a little tighter. Clem, when told, said simply, "Good," with the expression of a man who had been waiting for this development and considered it the natural and correct outcome of events. He immediately began building a cradle in his spare hours, working on it with the careful attention of a craftsman who intends the thing to last several generations. The winter of 1885 to 1886 was a cold one in Arizona territory, which meant that some nights it went below freezing, and the stock had to be watched carefully, which was nothing like the killing cold of Colorado or Montana, but was enough to require attention. Jasper took on the night watches without being asked for, sleeping in 4-hour shifts so he could check the cattle twice between midnight and morning. Maria protested that she could help, and Jasper said that she was growing a person, and that was already the most demanding thing on the ranch, and she was not going to spend the night in the cold checking cattle, which was one of approximately 3 times in their marriage that he had flatly overruled her on a practical matter, and she accepted it because he was right. She spent the winter reading. She had put together a genuine library of some 200 books, acquired through a combination of personal collection and a very productive correspondence with a bookseller in Denver, and she read her way through the winter evenings with the stove going and Jasper across the table with his own book, which was exactly what she had wanted her life to look like when she had allowed herself to imagine it. They talked about everything. History, which they both loved. The proper management of the water rights going forward, now that Stanton's challenge was permanently resolved. The question of the school situation in the valley, which was inadequate. There were children on ranches within 6 miles of the Norris place who had no access to a school teacher, which was a situation that Maria regarded as unacceptable and had begun to think about in organized ways. "You want to start a school," Jasper said one evening, not as a question. "I want to at least create the possibility of one," Maria said. "There is a building on the Medina family's property, you know, the Medinas, that is standing empty. If the families in the valley would support it, we could have something established within a year." "I know the Medinas," Jasper said, with the particular warmth he had whenever they were mentioned. "Juan Medina's daughter Rosa is 12, smart as a whip. She has had almost no formal schooling." "Exactly," Maria said. "Then let us start a school," Jasper said. "What do you need?" That spring, as Maria's pregnancy advanced into its final weeks, and she was managing the coordination of ranch work and a burgeoning correspondence with valley families about the school question, she was also aware of a change in herself that she could not entirely account for, but that was real. She had always been a capable and confident person. But this life, this particular combination of Jasper and the ranch and the child coming, and the school forming, was making her something more than capable and confident. She was becoming someone whose competence had a grounding to it, a depth that came from being genuinely loved and genuinely challenged and genuinely engaged with the world she was inhabiting. She thought about her father and hoped he could see it. Thomas James Brenner was born on the 29th of April, 1886, on a clear spring morning with the desert in full bloom outside the bedroom window. He came into the world with the loud, declarative energy of a person who has opinions and intends to be heard, which suggested to both his parents that he would take after his mother. Jasper held his son for the first time with the same carefulness and precision with which he did everything, but his face was undone in a way that Maria had never seen and would cherish for the rest of her life. Every guard dissolved, just pure astonishment and love, this contained and self-sufficient man looking at a 7-pound human being with the expression of someone who has just received the thing they did not know they were waiting for. "Thomas," Jasper said softly, for Maria's father. "Thomas Jasper," Maria said from the bed, exhausted and completely clear-eyed. "For both of them." Jasper looked at her with an expression she had no vocabulary for and did not need one for because it was entirely complete in itself. Clem brought the cradle in. It was beautiful, smooth-joined, and solid, made from the same creek-bottom timber as the room Jasper had added to the house, and polished with the same oil, so that the two pieces of the house matched each other in the way that things match when they are made by the same hands for the same people. Clem put the baby in the cradle and stood back and looked at both of them, the baby and the cradle, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has accomplished exactly what he set out to accomplish. The school opened that September, in the old Medina building that had been cleaned and repaired and equipped with a blackboard and a set of readers that Maria had ordered from Denver. 8 children enrolled on the first day, ranging in age from 6 to 14, from 3 different ranch families in the valley. Rosa Medina, at 12, was exactly as smart as Jasper had said, and Maria identified her within the first week as someone who, given any opportunity at all, would be capable of extraordinary things. Maria taught 3 mornings a week, which was what she could manage around the ranch in Thomas, and the families paid what they could, which was sometimes money and sometimes produce, and sometimes labor on the Norris ranch when extra hands were needed, which was an arrangement that suited everyone. It was not a proper salary or a proper school district, but it was real, and the children who came to it were learning things they had not had access to before, and this was, in Maria's estimation, the most important work she was doing in the valley. Jasper came to the school one afternoon, unannounced, just to look. He stood in the doorway and watched Maria at the blackboard with 8 children arrayed on the long bench before her, demonstrating the multiplication of fractions, and the expression on his face was the same expression she had seen when he held Thomas for the first time, which told her that he understood, without her having to explain it, that this was something as important to her as anything else she did, and that its importance was part of the reason he loved her. When she saw him in the doorway, she excused herself for a moment and stepped out. "You are spying on my classroom," she said. "I am observing the school's operations," he said, "as a member of the sponsoring community." That is a very formal description of lurking in a doorway. "I was not lurking, I was admiring," she looked at him. "Everything all right at the ranch. Everything is perfect," he said. "I just wanted to see you work." This was, she thought, probably the most romantic thing he had ever said to her, and he had said quite a few romantic things. She kissed him quickly and went back inside, and the 8 children who had watched this through the single window with enormous interest said nothing because Maria had taught them, among other things, that good manners occasionally required strategic silence. In 1887, Del Stanton died in the Yuma Territorial Prison of influenza, having served only 2 years of his 7-year sentence, which was a piece of information that Arturo Vega communicated in a letter with a certain studied neutrality that suggested he was not entirely sure how Maria would receive it. Maria received it with the same complicated quiet that she had felt when the verdict was read at his trial, not triumph, but a sense of something completed, a chapter fully closed. She folded the letter carefully and put it in the box where she kept important documents, and then she went out to find Jasper, because some pieces of information wanted to be received in the company of the person who had been at the beginning of the whole story. She found him at the north pasture fence, checking the wire, the same fence he had started repairing on his first full day at the ranch. She stood beside him and told him, and he listened, and then they stood together for a while looking at the cattle in the north pasture, the herd that now numbered over 80 head, the Norris brand clear and legitimate on every one of them, and the October sky above the desert was that extraordinary deep blue that Maria had come to think of as specifically hers, the blue that belonged to this land and this life. "It is over," she said. "It is over," he agreed. She took his hand. He held it. The years moved with the particular quality that good years have, quickly when you look back and fully when you are inside them. Thomas grew into a serious, quick child who had his mother's love of books and his father's capacity for physical work, and a combination of both their temperaments that was entirely and specifically his own. He was 5 when he first asked Jasper to teach him to ride properly, and Jasper taught him with patience and thoroughness, the same way he did everything. Their second child arrived in 1889, a daughter they named Elena, for the Spanish rendering of a name that Maria had always loved, and that seemed appropriate for an Arizona child. Elena arrived in the world with a different energy entirely from Thomas, quieter, watchful, with enormous dark eyes that took in everything around her with a calm and intense attention that suggested she was forming conclusions at a rate that would eventually be formidable. Clem Hatch, who was 69 by this point and moving more slowly but not absent from the ranch's work, looked at Elena on the day she was born and said, with the solemnity of a man making a professional assessment, "This one is going to run things." "She is 30 minutes old, Clem," Jasper said. "I know what I see," Clem said. Pedro Vasquez, who had been with the ranch for 5 years and had become indispensable, and was also, as of the previous year, married to a woman from Tucson, and living in the small house that Jasper and Maria had helped him build on the southeast corner of the property, said that Elena looked like a judge. Maria told him that was the finest thing anyone had said about a Brenner child so far, and Pedro beamed with the pride of a man who had gotten something exactly right. The school in the valley had grown. By 1889, it had 12 students and a second teacher, a young woman named Harriet Cole, who had come out from Missouri with her family the previous year, and who had teaching credentials from a normal school in St. Louis. The Valley families had formalized their support into something resembling an actual school district, and there were discussions with the county about eventual formal recognition, which Arturo Vega was navigating with characteristic efficiency. Rosa Medina, now 15, was reading at a level that Maria described to Jasper as extraordinary, and Maria had begun writing letters to an academy in Tucson on Rosa's behalf, making a case for scholarship consideration. Juan Medina wept, privately and then less privately, when Maria told him what she was doing, and Juan's wife pressed Maria's hands between hers and said something in Spanish that Maria did not need translated because the meaning was entirely clear. Jasper Brenner's legal situation had, by 1889, resolved itself into something that approached a normal life, though the approach had taken years and careful navigation. The settlement arrangement held. No new charges appeared. He had been for 4 years a working rancher, a community member, a man known in the valley and in Tucson as Maria Norris's husband and the father of Thomas and Elena, a man who could walk into Arturo Vega's office or the Tucson hotel dining room or the county assessor's office without the particular tension of a man managing a secret. He was not pardoned. He would not in his lifetime be precisely cleared. The past was what it was, and he had never asked for it to be otherwise. But the present was what it had become, and the present was a very good thing. One evening in the fall of 1890, when Thomas was 4 and Elena was 14 months, and the ranch was settled in its October rhythms, Maria and Jasper sat on the porch after supper in the particular peace of an Arizona evening. The sky was doing everything it did, the colors, the depth of the blue at the top, the orange and rose at the horizon, the first stars appearing. Jasper was reading. Maria was doing nothing, which she did rarely and which, when she did it, she did completely sitting with the evening and letting the quality of it be enough. After a while, Jasper set the book down and looked at the sky. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what?" she said. "About the fact that I am, by any measure I can apply, the luckiest man in Arizona territory," he said. "That is a large claim," she said. "There are a great many men in Arizona territory." "I stand by it," he said. She looked at him. The lamplight from inside the house came through the door and lit the side of his face, the gray eyes, the jaw, the face that had been weathered hard and started out well-made, the same face she had first seen across a dusty yard with a Winchester at her shoulder. It was a face she knew so well by now that she could construct it from memory with perfect accuracy, and she loved it with a specificity and completeness that still, after 5 years of marriage, surprised her in its intensity. "I love you," she said. He turned to look at her. He said it back without any hesitation, without any of the caution that had characterized him at the beginning. in the clear and uncomplicated way of a man who has found the truest thing in his life and no longer has any interest in pretending it is not what it is. She reached across and took his hand. Inside, Thomas stirred in his sleep and made a sound that resolved itself into silence. Alina was deeply asleep in her cradle, Clem's cradle, the one built from creek-bottom timber. Outside, the cattle were quiet in the north pasture, the same pasture they had walked into on the afternoon that everything began. The stars were out fully now, more stars than most people ever got to see, the particular magnificence of a desert sky unfiltered by city light, every constellation visible and sharp, the Milky Way a river of light across the middle of everything. "That day at the fence," Maria said, "when you brought the cattle back." "Yes," he said. "Nobody should profit from taking what is yours," she said. "You meant the cattle." "I meant the cattle," he said. "But you also meant something larger than the cattle." He was quiet for a moment. "I think I did," he said. "I did not know then how large it would turn out to be." "Neither did I," she said. She laced her fingers through his. He squeezed once, warm and certain. The night settled around them. The desert was alive with its night sounds, the coyote calling somewhere far off to the south, the wind moving through the ocotillo, the creak of the porch under their weight. The Norris ranch, the Brenner ranch now, which was what the neighbors called it, though the original name was on the deed and always would be, because Thomas Norris had built it, and that was worth remembering, sat solid in the dark, fenced and tended and entirely, undeniably real. In Tucson, Arturo Vega was working on the documentation that would make the school in the valley a recognized educational institution of Pima County. Rosa Medina had been accepted to the academy with a partial scholarship, the rest of which the valley families had pooled together to cover, and she would begin her studies the following January. Del Stanton was 2 years in his grave. Clem Hatch was asleep in his small room off the barn, under the quilt his sister had made him, his old rifle propped against the wall, his boots placed neatly by the door. Thomas Brenner, 4 years old and named for a grandfather he would never meet, would wake up in the morning and ask his father to take him to check the south fence, which was his current favorite ranch activity, and Jasper would say yes and lift him up onto the gray roan, older now, grayer, steady as stone, and they would ride out in the morning light, father and son, over the same land that a woman had once defended alone with a Winchester and a refusal to be defeated. Alina Brenner would grow up to be, as Clem predicted with complete accuracy, a person who ran things, eventually a doctor, which was a fact that Maria would live to see and would consider one of the finest outcomes of her life. But that was still many years away, and the evening on the porch was now, complete and full in itself, needing nothing added and nothing taken away. Maria looked at the stars. She thought about the word she would have used once for the shape of her life: practical, careful, organized, built on clear thinking and honest work. Those things were still true. They were the bones of her. But there was something else now, something that had arrived with 63 cattle and a man at a fence and 8 words that contained more genuine justice than anything she had heard from the official structures of the world. She would not have used the word home the way she used it now. She had thought she understood that word. She had not. She understood it now. Jasper shifted beside her. He was looking at the same stars. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "About tomorrow," he said. "The south pasture needs the wire checked. Thomas wants to help, which means it will take twice as long but will be considerably more entertaining." He paused. "And about you, I am thinking about you." "Both at once," she said. "Efficient. I manage," he said. She laughed, and the laugh went out into the October desert night, warm and real, and the stars burned overhead in their ancient and absolute abundance. And Jasper Brenner held Maria Norris Brenner's hand on the porch of a ranch that had been defended, and was now fully lived in, and would be for a very long time to come, because the people in it were the right people for it. And they had found each other by the particular combination of courage and circumstance and 8 words spoken plainly at a split-rail fence, and that was enough. That was everything.